So it's 7 o'clock and we're going to get started because I know some people want to get home and see some of the Olympic ceremony. So
welcome. We are Morgan and Paige Brownell. We are junior historians. We would like to introduce the South Hero Award President Terry Robinson, Vice President Peg Clark, Historian Dolph Worthing.
Treasurer Sue Crawley, Trustees Judy Duvall, Brent Corbin, Ken Rochlow, who will be taping for us tonight, Hazel Quench of the South Hero Museum. We would like to make a special thanks to Brett Corbin for all he did to make the granny get her hat back. Woo!
It's one of the oldest buildings in the town, and it means a lot to us kids that you put the cupola back up.
All right, so Brett, they were just talking to you, so then I have to say it again. So say it again, Morgan. I mean, Paige.
Okay.
Just
We would like to make a special thanks to Brett Corbin for all he did to make the granny have her hat back. Woohoo!
Please stay for cake afterwards. Thank you to George Brownell. Here's Peg Clappers.
Thank you. And thank all of you for coming. This is wonderful. Before we get into tonight's program, I want to announce that next month, on Friday the 7th of March, we're going to have a program entitled My Daddy's Farm. And Rod Laro and Ray Allen have consented to come and talk about it. And maybe some others of you might add a thing or two. Tonight we're really happy to have Joyce Robinson Blow and Sue McBride Crowley. And I say their first names because those are the South Hero families. And they have lots of pictures, as you can see, and we're just really happy to have both of them here to tell their stories.
Thank you.
thank you, Peg. Can you hear me all right? Okay, you have to get close to this thing. I've learned that from the programs that I've been to. First of all, welcome everybody. This is nice to see a nice crowd here. And I'm so pleased to be talking a little bit about growing up in South Hero because I had the most wonderful childhood that any kid could have. I was lucky enough to be born on a big farm on the West Shore. So we had the fields. My grandfather had about a 218-acre farm at that time. So we had fields and pastures and woods and the lake and the barn. So it was a trifecta for a kid because there was always something to do. We were always playing outside. And for all you youngsters here, we had no TV, no iPads, no cell phones, no technological objects of any kind. We had a radio and we had a telephone, and that was it. But what we did is we just played with everybody all the time. We'd get home from school and we would be outside. And in the wintertime, we slid. We had sliding hills and sliding parties. We used to go up on Pigeons Hill, which is the first house by the creek. It's where that new trailer moved in there. And up behind there, there was a beautiful sliding hill. And we would slide there and slide right onto the creek with that. And also in the wintertime, we had skating parties. I remember one time, our bay didn't freeze smooth very often because of south wind. There's usually anchor ice in there. Our grandmother taught us how to skate by bringing an old wooden chair from the kitchen, and she would bring that down. And that's how we learned how to skate. But I remember one winter when the bay froze like a mirror. It was absolutely beautiful. And we had a huge skating party there. All the kids in town came, and somehow my father, he lit an old tire on fire. And but I don't remember smelling like rubber or anything like that, but that thing burned all night. We had a nice fire out there. And my mother brought down gallons of hot chocolate and a huge chocolate cake, brought it down to the shore. And I always remember that. It was so much fun. And then the rest of our skating was usually done on the creek. And back then, it wasn't all filled in with rushes and grass and trees like it is now. It was open, and you could skate way, way, way back into the woods on the south side of it. And yeah, that was so much fun too. But one of my skating stories is one of the few times I ever remember my parents hollering at me, was that one time we skated, it was Henry Sandville, they worked for the Robinson farm, I think the Sandvilles, and Francis and Henry and probably some of the Robinson kids, a whole bunch of us, one day skated out from the east side, where Judy Duval used to live, Judy McBride Duval. We skated out to Kellogg's Island and back. And when we got back, our parents were waiting for us because it had only caught over that night. And we were lucky to be alive, all of us. So that's one of the few times. But anyway, I have a picture here. And if you hold the edges down, that is my brother and I, and we were all dressed up to go to Ray Allen's birthday party. And in the wintertime, there was nothing but snow, snow, and playing all the time. I remember we would make tunnels and forts in the snow, and they would last all winter. We would play in them all winter long. And back then, they used to put snow fences along the road, especially on the East Road, which is now the Station Road. They would put a snow fence along the whole length of it. And so when the south wind blew, it would blow into that fence and not so much into the road. So huge banks of snow would build up on those, and we'd make tunnels in those and play in them all winter long. And there we are, my sister Nancy, Bill, my brother, and myself, and there I am with my mouth open. Can you believe it? Oh gosh. And so anyway, we had so much fun in the wintertime. And then of course in the summer, here's one. We had the lake to swim in, and my cousin would often come and spend the summer with us because her father had died when she was just a baby. And there I am, ready to swim. And we had a nice sand beach down there, and my mother taught us to swim as soon as we could toddle. So we were swimming all of our lives. And I have a terrible story to tell about swimming, and you children can learn from this because it was such a dumb thing for me to do. I was about 11 years old, and there used to be a family, the Leonardsons, that owned Treetops camps, and they were way down past Contentment Farm, just before the road goes down to that east road across from Robinson's old farm, old barn there. And so Jan and I and Benny, I think you were there, Virginia Lyman, I think you were there, and Jane Gardner and I and Maureen Jarvis went out swimming, and we got out over a drop-off, and we didn't really realize it. So we all were ready to dive in and swim, and Maureen said, well, I can't swim. And big mouth. I said, of course you can swim. Who ever heard of anybody that can't swim? We live on the lake, for goodness sakes. And so she said, no, I can't swim. I said, well, if you don't go in, I'm going to push you in. And so she jumped in, and she could not swim. And she was drowning. So foolishly, I had never had life-saving at that because I was only probably 10 years old. I swam right over to her, and she got a death grip around my neck, and down we went, and down and down and down. And at that point, I realized that I was only interested in saving myself. And somehow I got back up to the top, and I hollered to Jane Gardner, and she came over and helped me, and we finally got her back into the boat. But that was such a foolish thing to do, and don't ever do that, you kids. And my grandparents lived next door. That was the other bonus, because my grandmother was such a wonderful cook. Well, my mother was too. And I spent a lot of time over there getting to know my grandparents. And I think so many kids today don't have that. And it was just wonderful. And I spent half my life over there. So anyway, Joyce, I'll let you talk now.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here. And yes, I am so glad to be here, especially with Susan, because I spent half of my childhood with her and her family as well. Okay. And I can identify with just about everything that she is saying. Now, I'm going to start my talk by saying that I was born in 1933, and it was Flag Day, the 4th of July, Flag Day, June 14th, on my mother's birthday. And it was always a very special day for both of us, and we always did. We got on the train usually and went to town. We went shopping, out to lunch, and then to the movies. And that was really special. And then back on the train, home we came. We moved to Livingston's. They owned a farm. That's where Jill Hazen lives now. And it was a two-house house. It was two homes, but one half of it is gone now. There was a new barn being built, and I became a little farmerette. My mom took side jobs for extra income, plus working for the Livingstons. So she was away a lot, and the Livingstons took really good care of me. And I did a lot of little girl chores, like going to the barn and putting molasses in front of the cows while they were being milked, and feeding the small calves their bottles with their feed in the bottle, and sometimes trying to clean the gutters. And I had a special cow named Molly, and she had big teats, and I would try to milk her. But I was pretty small. And here's a picture of the calf and myself in the barn. And I spent many hours playing with the little animals in the spring, like the little piglets that were born, and they were so adorable, and I used to try to pick them up and play with them. And then every spring there was 500 little chickens that would arrive on the train, and I just loved those little chickens. And being the only child and being with adults, I used my kittens for babies. I'd put them in the baby carriage and dress them up with doll clothes, and they would sleep for hours. Then in the spring, there was the tapping of the trees and maple sugaring, boiling the sap. And here is a picture of me with the sap boiling. And there was always a special time because there was maple syrup and pancakes, maple cream, and maple sugar. And we also had a family not too far from us. There was Arlie Howe and his wife that had a large sugar bush and a huge building. And they actually, Mrs. Howe made a business, and of her maple products, selling them. And I still have some of her cutters that she used for maple cookies and maple sugar. And I think I may donate them to the museum.
Thank you.
And then there were the chickens. Here's another picture of Mrs. Livingston with the chickens. And I spent many hours in the fields with Mr. Livingston as he was taking care of me very, very well. And I loved it. Sometimes it would be boring all over me. I was scream bloody murder. I was petrified. They'd stick to me. And I'm on the machinery and can't get off. And here is a picture of me on some of the machinery out in the field. I think I rode everything that there was. In those days, the farmers had horses. They may have had one tractor, but horses were used much of the time. And they hired a lot of help. In those days, there were people that didn't have any income, and there wasn't any welfare or any help from the state for anyone. And men would walk the roads just looking and stopping at people's houses for something to eat. And my grandmother would always let them in and feed them and give them food and send them on their way. And that was a really different world, because people either worked or they didn't eat, or they couldn't support their families. So they would work for their board in many cases and just try to find a place where they could stay and just work for the board. And that meant that you might have cheap help, and it wasn't always the best, like we think of help today. It was someone that was in dire need, and half of the time they might be drinking, and you really didn't know until something happened. And then we had another gentleman come and live with us that had murdered his wife, and he had been in prison for years. And he walked with both feet out because the ball and chain had been on his feet for so many years. He was a kind, gentle man. I don't know how many years he spent in prison. But then we had another little gentleman that came to work, and he would go to Montreal every now and then, and he'd take a little trip up there and come back, and he'd be very inebriated, and he'd fall downstairs and wipe everything out on the side of the stairway, all the lamps. And Mrs. Livingston, I thought that was one thing she couldn't tolerate. But anyway, we got through it with the help that we had. And one of the other pictures is just out in the field, I guess, with me with a little chair. And another one with me on my tricycle. There we go. And also back in those days, we didn't have refrigeration. The only refrigeration we had was an ice block in the top of the refrigerator. And I never drank milk because I didn't like warm milk, and it was never cold enough for me. But another thing that we did have, we had Mr. Steady. Bert Steady was the meat man, and he had a truck, and he traveled through the islands, and he sold meat. And he'd always give me a hot dog, and I couldn't wait for him to come. That was Bernard Steady's father, Bert Steady from Milton. And I'm sure there's some people here who know who I'm talking about. And that's my sister-in-law, Teresa, and Susie. And anyway, here's a picture of Bert Steady holding me. Then there were rides on the Ticonderoga, many rides on the Ticonderoga. And that was quite a thing for a little girl. The dining room was just beautiful. Dancing and orchestra. The top deck at night was absolutely beautiful on a moonlit night. There'd be lovers sitting on the benches holding hands. And it was really very special because this is a picture of me. You can hardly see me. I think we may be at Port Kent in this picture. And we get off at Port Kent, and they would wait a while, and then everybody would get back on again, and they'd go on their way. And one time the tide came up through the islands, and I don't know how many people here might remember that. And I don't know if they went through the Grand Isle Bridge or if they could get through. But that's me, right down in the bottom with my arm up in the air. And this... This is another picture. I'm on the Ticonderoga, and I thank you for doing this, girls. And now, as a result of the Ticonderoga, I have to tell you this story. We have ended up with one of the Fisher girls. The Corbins owned the tie in the beginning, and they sold it to Mr. Fisher, the senior, and his wife. And they sold it to Martin Fisher and Esther Fisher. And their daughter, Esther, married my brother-in-law, Raymond Blow. And his son is now a natural captain. Her father and grandfather were both captains of the tide. Their pictures are there now. And this is Roger, their son, and he's captain of the Grand Isle Ferries. And here's a picture of Roger and my son Robin. Both, they're visiting Roger while he's going across the lake. And that's Robin, here's Robin and there's Roger. So we have another Fisher in the family and another captain of the boats. And he's also captain in Charlotte as well. And I think I'm going to let Susan take over now. And thank you.
All right. One of the things we had in town when we were growing up, we had movies. The town hall used to be not what it is now, but it used to be actually a big hall. And this lady would come and show the movies once on the weekends. And of course, it had a wooden floor, and there were old wooden chairs in there, and a whole lot of kids sitting in them, clacking and making all kinds of noise. And Mrs. Bevan, she also clacked on the piano too. And so when it was time for the movie to start, we'd all be stamping our feet on the floor and making a lot of noise. And she'd get up on the stage right in front and say, "I have a pin in my hand, and I'm not going to start this movie until I can hear this pin drop." And she would actually drop the pin. And if she couldn't hear it, she didn't start the movie. So we finally would settle down, and then she would play the movie. But honest to gosh, it was so much fun. I sang in the choir up here with my mother in the Congregational Church when I was a little girl. And actually, I sang a solo there when I was 5 years old. In our Christmas pageant, I sang "Santa Claus is Coming to Town." And my mother wrote in my baby book, "Susan sang in a clear, sweet voice." Well, what else is your mother going to write in your baby book? But anyway, one day, it was actually during the Sunday service, and we had this tall lady, Ethel Mooney. Some of you will remember her. She and her husband, Ray Mooney, started the freezer locker over here. So all of our stuff that we used to can could finally be put in a freezer locker, and you would rent a drawer. And it would pull out just like in the morgue, really, but there was vegetables in it. Huh?
What's in the freezer now?
It's where David Carter's building is. It was right there, wasn't it, Joyce? Yeah, it was right there. And so that was wonderful because we used to sit on the lawn with just mounds of vegetables that we had to get done before we could go swimming, shuck the corn, shuck the peas, whatever it was. And anyway, back to the church, we were singing, and we were just about to sing the hymn, How Firm a Foundation. And boom, down went the choir bench with Ethel with it. So, the foundation of the choir bench wasn't very firm at that time. So anyway, and then of course the highlight of what we did here was to get on the train when we were kids and go to Burlington and go to the movies. And we did that quite often. A lot of the local kids, we'd go in a whole bunch. And that was so much fun. We'd get off in Burlington, walk up Church Street, have our pictures taken, have lunch at Upton's on the corner, go to the movie, and then right back down to the station to catch the train going north again, back to Montreal. And so we would get off in South Hero. Well, one time, the train was slowing down, it actually stopped, so we got off, and my brother was with us, and my gosh, the train started up again, and we were way down, almost back out to the fill again. It's like they had gone on a side rail because a freight train had gone by, and then they started back up again, and we were outside. We had to walk all the way back on the tracks to get back to the station.
How old was you?
Oh, probably 10, 11. We would go by ourselves. Imagine today. My mother would take us down to the station, or else she'd give us $1. That would take care of the entire day. And, oh yeah, Joyce has got a picture of the station here. And, yeah, we would go by ourselves. My sister and Joyce were, 2 years older than I, so they were our chaperones, I suppose. But we had so much fun on the train, and it was so exciting, and there was always a nice porter that was on there that would sort of look after us. And then another time, we forgot to get off in South Hero. I don't know what we were doing. The train started up again, and we had to pull that cord, and oh my gosh, we had to stop the train and get off. So we did that. But, and we also had dances in the town hall. So, there were things to do back then here for kids. And one of the biggest part of my life growing up here also was being involved in the 4-H program. And my brother would, have a calf that he would feed and take care of and show at the fair. And I was always in clothing groups, and we would make a dress, and I actually modeled it on the grandstand one time. And girls, you can put this on. And we also had a 4-H band up here that was very, very active. And there is myself, Nancy Bierman, and Hazel Robinson Quelch with our drums. And we played the drums in the 4-H band. And Hazel's on the right-hand side, I'm in the middle, and Nancy Bierman. And her father was our doctor at that time, Dr. Bierman. He doctored the whole town. He was a wonderful man. But I have an old, this is a concert that we had, and Mr. Piedmont was our director, and look at that, we had 16 pieces that we played with our little band. And my father would go into Winooski and get him, bring him up here for the day. He would give all the kids their music lessons, and then he would have supper with us, and then we would have band practice, and then he'd bring him back all the way to Winooski. And that was really something for my dad to do, but he loved music. And my father was actually a violinist. He played the violin in the Burlington High School Orchestra in like the 1923. I have a picture of that. And, oh gosh, I don't know why I saved all this little stuff, but this is my 4-H thing when I made a dress. And just the cotton, the material, the pattern, the zipper and everything, $2.63. So, oh, well, you can if you don't have to. And Terry, I thought you would like this. We labored over our bylaws when we started this first historical society. These are the bylaws we had for our little 4-H band. We had pages and pages of bylaws. You can look at that. Oh my God. And what else do I have here? Oh, well, of course.
Your ribbons.
Oh, my ribbons. 3 excellents and a good. Oh my gosh. But I wanted to, I'm a 5th generation. We have 8 generations now born in Vermont of our family. And I wanted to just do this quickly because I know we're already gone through a half hour. But there's so many interesting things in this. This is about my grandfather. And he took over the farm when he was only 19. And he was a blacksmith also. And that shop that still sits on the corner of Station Road and West Shore Drive, still there. That was his blacksmith shop. And I used to go up there and watch him with the anvil, and he'd have the big fire. There was a big stone hearth in there, working on pounding out the horseshoes for the farm horses. And it was most interesting. But, and also what he did for he was quite a socialite for his day. He used to put on clam bakes down on our shore. And I can't imagine him buying lobsters and clams and all that stuff, growing up with him and knowing how frugal he was. But he did. And he also had one of the first cars in the islands. And it was I have a picture of that too. It was a 1909 EM Flanders, and he paid $600 for it. And also, I'm going to read this quickly because this was my grandparents' 57th wedding anniversary, and there's some really interesting things in here. And it first goes on, blah, 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 blah. Served in town offices, all that. But together in 1942, before the PTA was organized, Mr. and Mrs. McBride started a hot lunch program here in here in South Hero. And I think that would have been the time when we would be going to grade school. So I'm sure they wanted to know that we had a hot meal. And so Nana would cook everything at her house and then bring it over to the school in these big, large pans. And that was quite something. Honest to gosh, I don't know how she did that. But in addition to his dairy farming, Mr. McBride was a carpenter for several years. He once built a bowling alley in his own barn. And can you imagine? The floor he hewed and planed from white ash, the bowling balls from elm wood, and the pins were made out of pine. And he carved all those bowling balls. Can you imagine? For 10 years, the alley served as social and sports center for friends who otherwise would have had to take the train to Burlington to bowl for an evening. 60 years ago, Mr. McBride made his own ice boat, a 35-footer. He never did get to race her because the only club around was in Plattsburgh. But my father told me that he went to Plattsburgh and back in that ice boat in 8 minutes. So another one of his favorite sports was baseball. They had a baseball team in South Hero back in 1904. That's when they got married. And on the afternoon of his wedding day, he played first base, and his team beat Heinsberg. He made it home in time, however, to get to the evening ceremony by horse and buggy, pouring rain and all. Honeymoon? Goodness, no, said Mrs. McBride. We went home and went right to work. Never did get away for 25 years when we went to Florida in 29. And he owned the first car, that's up there, the old Flanders. He has owned only 4 cars in his total lifetime, and he lived to be 88, running each until it was worn out. So he was quite a guy. He really. And I have a receipt. I don't know why all these things were saved and who did, but anyway, my father went to Burlington High School, also from South Hero, and this is a receipt from the public schools in Burlington, received for Henry McBride for the fall term of 1923 for $20. How about that? This is a picture of my father and my grandfather. And that's my father and my grandfather, and I think my sister Nancy when she was a baby. And that thing that my father's carrying is a separator, and that would separate the milk from the cream, and he would bring that in and wash it in hot sudsy water because there wasn't hot water in the barn. I love that picture. It's just such a typical early farm picture. And we have 8 generations, actually, of our family now born in Vermont. I'm the fifth generation. But let's see. Do we want to talk about the sturgeon fishing?
I'm going to do something a little different here first. Okay. And then we'll do that.
Okay. And I got to talk about Lou Bird.
Okay, Mr. Livingston had the local taxi for the well-to-do people from faraway places arriving on the midnight flyer. That was the train, and it would come in at 12 o'clock. And the butlers and the maids would arrive in their formal attire, and I even made them promise to wake me so I could be with them, because it was so exciting to meet the train. Then we would take them to the landing and then await the big boats coming in the dark, and they would be chugging in, and it was exciting to see the boat land and bring the people to their final destination for the summer. He was also the assistant mail carrier, and I would go to the post office and wait for Seal Jocelyn. The post office was in a home, in Seal Jocelyn's home, and I would wait for them to sort the mail, and then I would go along on the route with Mr. Livingston, and I would put the mail in the mailboxes. And I knew just about everyone in town and where they lived. Then he was also the local photographer, and I would go with him to take pictures. When people had special occasions like graduations and weddings and family pictures, he would be called, and I would go and I would assist him. And then I spent many hours in the dark room in the evenings helping to develop pictures. And it was so exciting waiting to see the subjects when they appeared. And I would help to dry the negatives and cut the pictures and sort them and count them and put them in containers to be delivered to the customers. And then on Sunday we would take a ride and we would have a picnic. And the wonderful thing about it was, here is one of the pictures of us having a picnic. We would stop on the way and buy a vanilla ice cream cone, and that was about the only time I ever had anything sweet other than what was baked at home, and I thought that was just wonderful. You could ride along and stop anywhere, regardless if it was private property, and find a beautiful place, green grassy knolls, maybe near a lake, and spread your blanket or your tablecloths and have your lunch. And no one ever asked us to ever leave in any location. And that was the one thing about the freedom we did have on the islands that I did love. You could walk anywhere and never have to worry about anyone harming you. Or you could walk on anyone's land, or you could go swimming in almost every beach, even though they were privately owned. And I think that was a wonderful thing. We could build a fire and cook hot dogs, and our friends and families would gather at White's Beach, then was completely public, and we'd build fires in the evening, and we'd sing around the fires, and we'd have just wonderful times. And here's another picture of a picnic along the way. And I also have a picture, and I think it's kind of unique. This is down at Apple Tree Bay, and I don't know what year it was, but maybe some of you people will know the year by the cars. I don't know what was going on, if there was a fishing derby or what was happening, but Parky snapped this picture, and I always kept it because I thought it was really unique, looking at the cars. And then,
Probably early 30s, I believe.
yeah, well, it's right down on the left where you turn to go. It's at the left of the bay, where you turn to go down where they park to go fishing. Uh-huh. And I thought that was unique. Also, 4-H was a big thing on the islands. And I have a picture that I think is unique of Chester Martell. He owned a large farm, and I'm sure there's some people here who know where that farm is and who owns the farm. But anyway, the Martells lived a little ways from my grandmother, and we would walk down and get milk there every day. But Chester was very interested in our young boys in town, and he started a 4-H club. And they were called the Champlain Boys, and they were very active, and he was a very wonderful man. And he later became our representative. At that time, each town had their own representative, and Chester became ours. But he certainly was a very unusual and wonderful man. And Andre Champagne is here on the end. And if we could get that a little more clear, there may be some other local people that might know who they are. There was also the Jocelyn Boys, and I haven't been in touch with Horace Jocelyn. I don't know if anyone else has. He became a dentist in Burlington. He was in our class at school, and he had a very unfortunate thing happened. Someone broke into his office and pounded a bead on his head, and they say he's really never been quite the same since. But anyway, Horace and Donald, I believe, are both in there. There was Leeward Martell. I really can't, it's not really quite clear. Morris Burnham. It's not quite clear enough for me to. But anyway, I was very active in 4-H as well. Most of the young children in South Hero or on the islands were 4-Hers, and we learned to preserve foods and sew our clothes and many, many other things. And we brought our produce to the fair or whatever we had made, so that we would be graded, as Susan was just saying. And that was really, and also another thing that was taught in 4-H was good health habits. And one of the things in my day that was taught was good posture, take good care of your health, politeness and manners, and honesty and respect for older people. And I think that was a real virtue. And I loved older people, and I learned a lot from older people. They would teach you, they would tell you stories about their older days, and they would teach you to crochet, to knit. And in those days, they crocheted bedspreads, they made quilts, and they cooked such wonderful foods on the old wood stoves, and that was an art. Because to bake a cake or a popover, the temperature of that wood stove had to remain at the same temperature in order for your food to turn out really well. And I think the older people were wonderful bakers. Anyway, the Livingstons took in laundry, and they did Hochulaga's laundry. Without any running water, all the water came from the springs and the wells and the reservoir, heated on the wood stove. And Hochulaga was a big deal for me because I would go and I would visit. And every year they would have a water ballet, and sometimes they'd put on a show, and they always invited us. And the water ballet was really, really special. And Eagle campers came a lot, too, and had their laundry done. But there wasn't any, the one thing about this was, I don't know how these ladies did it. Mom and Ernest were real workers, and they hired extra help, too. But there wasn't any such thing as wash and wear clothing. Everything had to be ironed, hung on the line. There weren't any dryers, and they had the big tubs to rinse the clothes, and the wringer washing machines, and the clothes looked like they had come out of the store when they were finished ironing, and they would iron till 3 o'clock in the morning sometimes. I think our older generations certainly were a wonderful example unto us, and I appreciate that a lot. I saw hardworking, honest people, and Mom and I were always in church every Sunday, unless there was an illness of some kind. And I was very active in church, and I started singing in the choir when I was very young. And most of our activities were really around our church. And we would often have wonderful dinners, and all the ladies would do their very best baking and making food. And they were all people that you knew, all townspeople, warm, friendly faces. It was just a warm, wonderful community, and it still is, and I do love the islands. And another thing about the church was that as I grew older, I did become very active. I helped put on dinners, and I taught catechism. I went to catechism, made my first communion, and made my confirmation. And here is a picture of my confirmation. It's growing older, and I've kind of skipped a couple things here that I wanted to put on. And talking about parents, it seemed like the elderly ladies were wonderful seamstresses, and they sewed everything. My mom sewed this outfit that I have on, complete outfit, and the ladies sewed, they made their own dresses and shirts even, and some of their coats. And our winter clothes were not worn like we have today. They were wool, and our mittens were usually knit. And they'd get wet real quickly, and our hands would freeze, and we had rubber boots. And sometimes we'd put a couple pair of socks inside those boots just to keep our feet warm. And we'd have to come in and warm up because, we couldn't really, we couldn't imagine the clothes that they have today to keep warm. And here's a picture of an outfit that my mom had sewed for me. And I was always kind of proud of that. It was red. And I was out on the ice on that day. I don't know just where, but anyway. Then I'm going to go into first grade. We didn't have a bus. We had a barge, a truck with a big wooden box on the back, and it had benches on both sides. But we had a brand new school on Hill Road, and my first teacher was Mrs. Winch, whom I loved dearly. And then the next year, we had Miss Mack, who had lived in Bristol. She moved to the islands, and she eventually became Mrs. Lloyd Carter. And then Miss Kirby came, and Miss Kirby eventually became Mrs. Allen Kinney. And she was one of my special teachers as well as Kay. And I babysat for Alan and Helen, for the first children. And she used to play piano for me. I would be asked to sing at local functions in town. And then we had one special teacher. It was my favorite year, and I think it might have been fourth or fifth grade. I'm not really sure. But we had the daughter of Dr. Lechner, who was the professor of music at the University of Vermont, and she taught us that year. And Mr. Lechner would come and visit us, and he just was so wonderful. And I loved that year of school because I loved music, and wherever there was music, I was there. And we put on many, many shows in town, and minstrel shows were great. We had so much fun, and the reason it was so much fun was there were so many good personalities, and no one knew who we were because they couldn't tell, because we were dressed in different clothing, and we were dark, and it was fun. And then there was another wonderful thing that took place during my grown-up years, and that was the cakewalk the University of Vermont used to put on. And the ice sculptures were all over Burlington, and they were beautiful. They were like the ones at Lake Placid. Maybe not quite that elaborate, but they were wonderful. And then the walking for the cake took place at the Memorial Auditorium. And that was really super. And then there was a beautiful ball after, and dance. And also, getting back to the trains, I am going to tell you about the Freedom Train, and I don't know if anyone remembers that. The Freedom Train was a beautiful train that toured the whole United States and it was painted red, white, and blue. Beautiful train. And it carried all the important official documents from Washington. And they were under glass cases. And the train stopped in Burlington, I think maybe for a week, so that all students and teachers and all public could review the documents. And there were guards on the train. It was a beautiful train. And then also I attended concert at the Memorial Auditorium where the world-renowned famous violinist came and gave a concert. And then after the concert, we were rushed down to the train where he stepped down in this beautiful coat and derby and the most gorgeous suede gloves. And he shook our hands and he gave us his autograph. And that was Fitz Chrysler. And it was just the most exciting thing. And I was with Horace Jocelyn's family that night, and it was a wonderful evening. We spent many times in Burlington at the Memorial Auditorium for concerts and the ballets. And there were many other things, but I'm going to turn this over to Susan because I've been talking quite a while.
Well, I do want to get this in before we run out of time. I want to tell you a little bit about the Folsoms, especially since there are students here that go to Folsom School. Mr. and Mrs. Folsom were great friends of my grandparents, and they were from Chicago. And actually, Mrs. Folsom was a millionaire in her own right. Her maiden name was Bullock, and there were Bullock department stores from California to Chicago. And she was very wealthy, as well as Mr. Folsom was. There's a picture of them. And I have a deed here. My grandfather sold them the land when they first came here in 1923. And it's, I don't know, probably most of you don't know where the Folsoms lived. It was off the West Shore Road from where I live, between us and the Wright Farm, and there's a road that goes down to the road there, near where Eloise Roberts lives. And the Folsoms had a beautiful cottage down there. And they had about almost nearly 600 feet of lakefront, if you can imagine that. And then the line went all the way back to West Shore Road. And my grandparents, and I noticed that Bertha is the one that signed the deed. So she had the money at that time, apparently. And that whole parcel was sold by my grandfather to them for $3,500 in 1923. But anyway, the Folsoms, and one of my summer jobs was to carry fresh milk to them on my bicycle. And they had a chauffeur and a butler named Dan, and they had a Swedish cook named Inga. And she would always save their steak bones and chops and stuff like that for our dog. And then when I would go down and deliver the milk to them, she would have it ready for us to come back. But when they would come in the spring, it was always a big event. They'd drive their big car right down to my grandparents' house, and they would all get out, and they were just wonderful. They didn't have a family of their own. They sort of took us, we were sort of their summer family, and they loved all of us children and gave us beautiful gifts when we were married, and my parents and everything else. But my cousin told me this, I didn't know this, that Mr. Folsom's cousin, Clara, was the first wife of Grover Cleveland, President Grover Cleveland. And I have a lot of paper clippings here that her mother had saved, and that's why she had saved them, because it was Mr. Folsom's cousin. And she was a beauty, and what it says in this paper clipping, it says, the beautiful, charismatic Frances Folsom married the gruff, portly Grover Cleveland in 1886, when he was 49 and she was all of 21. Think of Frances as the Jackie Kennedy of her day, with the poise, the elan, and the popularity with the public. So that's quite interesting. And also, the Clevelands eventually had 2 sons and 3 daughters, one of whom, Ruth, inspired the Baby Ruth candy bar. So that's about the Folsoms. And of course, you know that the Folsoms gave the first $50,000 to have this school built. And I was in the first graduating class of Folsom School. And here's a picture of our class, actually. And I'm sorry to say that I think Lee Patno and I are the only ones that are still living out of that picture. I don't know about Janice Anderson on the end. I'm not sure about her. But I think we're only 2 of us are still alive. That's amazing to me. But anyway, I'm on the end on the right-hand side. Then Lee Patno, Jane Gardner, Jimmy Lawrence, Betty, Bernadette Hemingway's sister Betty, and then Elon Patno and Freddie Branch. And, yeah, Virginia, oh, Vinnie, yeah, Virginia. They were the class marshals, she and Francis Sandell. Yeah. And also, speaking about schools, I went to 3 schools here in South Hero growing up. I went to the Hill School, too, that Joyce was talking about. And then I went to the White Meeting House School, or whatever they called it then, for 5th, 6th, and 7th grades. Granny's attic building. I went there for 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. And this was our square dance class up there. We learned how to square dance. And that's Fred Branch in the middle, Irma Lombard, Armand Blow, Jane Gardner, Leo Pigeon, myself, Michael Tourville, who was such a cutie, and I had such a crush on him. And we learned how to square dance up there. And also up there, I had Mary Friend in 8th grade here in Folsom School. And she's the one that introduced me to classical music. She played a Tchaikovsky suite, The Nutcracker, and we had to learn and memorize every movement of that, and I loved that music. It was so beautiful. I've loved music all my life anyway, thanks to my father and mother, but we had to take a test on that, and of course I got 100 on it. I still have that paper because we had to memorize all the suites, the Dance of the Fairies, the Sugar Plum Fairies, and the soldiers marching and everything else. But, so Folsom School. And we wanted to briefly say, Joyce's father, Hollis, and my father fished sturgeon. And you've heard of sturgeon here that used to be fished in Lake Champlain. And I actually have a netting license of my father's. It was $20. And he was to fish South Hero and Colchester, beginning at Colchester Point, extending north along the railroad fill, along west shore of South Hero to Ferry Landing at Grand Isle, and westerly to the New York-Vermont boundary along said points. And that's where he could fish and put out his nets for the sturgeon. And in Yankee magazine, I think they still publish probably, it's a Yankee magazine about New England. There was an article in there, and in it featured my father and Hollis Robinson with a sturgeon. And I'll put this up after, but in it says, Henry McBride lives in South Hero, Vermont, an island in the northern end of the lake. For over 50 years, he netted sturgeon in the waters around his island home. In 1967, he was only one of 2 men, I think the other one was Hollis, to obtain a sturgeon netting license from the state. That was the last year he or anyone else legally fished for sturgeon in Lake Champlain, because Vermont prohibited it after that. And it says, despite his inability to catch any sturgeon during 1967, Henry McBride insists some must still be living in the lake. He tells about one net he set in 1967 that mysteriously disappeared, only to turn up about 2 miles away from its original location. Because the net was fully extended when he turned up, Mr. McBride believes the school of sturgeon must have moved it. A couple hundred sturgeon must have hit it, otherwise it would have closed. What could it have been? And so I remember, and yeah, it could be. Now, here's a picture. It'll give you an idea of the size of what a sturgeon could be in Lake Champlain. And this one wasn't one my father caught, but it was one in the article in this magazine. These people found it, and it had dozens and dozens of lamprey all over it, and they rescued it. They didn't even know what it was. They were just up here fishing this, and that's how big they could be. And so it lived. They rescued it and got all the lamprey off of it and put it back in the water, and it did live.
When Hollis would bring the fish in from the nets, he would tie them with a rope through the fence to the dock. And I would go down at times when I had friends, I wanted to show them the fish, and I would pull the rope in. And they were so big and so strong that when I pulled them in, their tails would swish, and it was so strong that there was white foam that would just fly for, I don't know how many feet in the air. It was remarkable. They were beautiful, beautiful fish. And they would wait until they had enough fish. Then they would butcher them, pack them in barrels. The train would stop on the railroad and pick up the barrels and take them to New York City, I think. And then they would send a check back, I think by train. Here you go, Sue.
Well, it said in that article somewhere, the girls have got it, that it was the best caviar in the world that came from the sturgeon roe. Better than Russia's or anybody else's, and so that was quite a thing for a long, long time.
I'm just going to steal this from... I kind of wanted to show this one thing. I think it'll be of interest, and maybe somebody can help me with this. I have a picture of Homer Keeler, and he used to have a large farm on the Goulette plate, the Goulette farm. That was his farm, overlooking Keeler's Bay. And this is a picture of Homer Keeler and myself. This is in their kitchen, and he was our state's attorney at the time. And I think he may have been a representative at another time. But this is Homer and I was a little girl, and Mom was working for, I'm not sure if she was working for them then, but Mr. Livingston took that picture. He was the local photographer, and I think Keeler's Bay was named after Homer Keeler. Yes. And he was a very, very wonderful man. His wife was Kitty, and she was an invalid, and she needed special care. He had a wonderful family. And this is the photographer that took that picture. This is Mr. Livingston, the man that I've been talking about. He was the most wonderful, articulate, kind, gentle man. And all the years that we lived there, I never heard one bad word or ever lift his hand. He was just a very clean person. When he dressed to go somewhere, he would have a vest, he had a three-piece suit. His hair was perfect. He wore bats on his shoes, and spats on his shoes. And his shoes, you could see your face in his shoes. And he had many, many, many wonderful qualities. He would take me to the fair every year, and he loved sulky racing, and he did have sulkies, and I believe at one time he owned horses and he did race, because he and I would go to the races, and that was at the fairgrounds at the time. So I'm going to hand out Homer Keeler, because I'm not sure it was after him, but I think it was.
Has anybody here ever heard of the Camp Dingley Dell? No. All right. Well, it was a boys' camp that was built in 1923 by Lou Baker's father. And Lou Baker, we called him Boo Boo Baker. He was a very eccentric type man. It's up on, does everybody know where Johnny Branch lives? On the top of the hill there, Well, on the right-hand side, when you go over, there's a big, that black and orange buildings. Well, those were a summer camp for boys called Dingley Dell. And I got onto the web and started looking up about Mr. Baker, and this is the most interesting thing I have ever read. His wife had written a tribute to him of 25 pages in a PDF on the web. I couldn't read it all, but my sister's going to print it all out. But he was known all around the world as he was a professor emeritus of chemistry at Georgetown University, an internationally renowned inorganic chemist and educator. And his father built that camp in the 1920s, and they brought boys up here from Georgetown, I believe, as summer campers, and they built this wonderful, huge sailing boat called the Aladdin. And when we were kids, we used to be down on the shore down there by Upton's Camp, and we came across this boat in the woods, and there it was called the Aladdin. We had no idea what it was, but it was a boat that Lou built, and his boys there built it in about a week. And there's a picture of it in this tribute that his wife wrote to him. And it was absolutely beautiful. The sails were all different colored. There were about 8 sails on it. And they would take it up the lake, put the boys in it, and put supplies in, and spend a week on that thing. But the other thing about Mr. Baker was he loved convertibles. And when we were kids, we would see him drive by our house, and he had thick blonde hair and little Coke glasses, thick glasses, round glasses, and his mother would be in the back seat, and she had thick white hair, would be flying around. But he was one of the first discoverers of DDT. And in 1948, he briefly tried his hand at the manufacture and marketing of DDT in northern Vermont under the brand name Baker's Best. Vermont farmers of a certain age still remember it as the best. He soon realized it cost more to bottle, label, and pay a salesman partner than the return on the product that he was selling. But anyway, he's a most interesting character, and I have the web site here if anybody wants to take it down and read this, because it is so interesting. And his father was a hugely smart person also. I mean, gosh, his father was involved in designing the hydraulic system for raising and lowering the stage at Radio City Music Hall. If you've ever seen that and been that, this whole stage goes up and down, becomes a skating rink, comes back up again. Also, the hydraulic system for planes on the carrier U.S. Enterprise. And he was involved in the Manhattan Project. Anybody know what that is? The beginning of the building of the atomic bomb. So this family has quite a history, and they came up for many, many summers, and they had 3 children. I think their kids come, because I've seen it a couple years ago. It was mowed there, right? Yeah. And so they still come up. They had a tennis court there, and they wanted to buy more of the land, didn't they? But they were some of Jackson Point, but they couldn't get it. So anyway. Are there any questions? All right. This is my last item, and this is very, I mean, I know.
Oh, I know.
Another fun thing I used to do, this is just really quick, was Colonel Jackson, who drove the first car across the country. Well, he had 2 granddaughters that were my age. And they were also friends of my grandparents. And so we used to go down there and play. They had the most beautiful sand beach. It was like an ocean beach. And sand dunes. And of course, that was before anything else was built down there. They had their big house on the point there. And the most fun thing about that was that they had an outdoor playhouse that had a sand pit in it. It had swings in it and a teeter-totter. And so even if it was raining out, you could still play outside in that playhouse. It was just absolutely wonderful. And so I spent a lot of fun years down there playing with Colonel Jackson's granddaughters. Oh, great. This will be the last thing. Well, This is interesting too. And when I was here in 8th grade at Folsom School, I was assigned to go to the town meeting of 1949 and take notes and then write it up as a report. And so this is my report. I'm not going to read the whole thing because most of it is who was elected, town officers and all that stuff. But in the end, these are questions that were to be voted on. Should the roads be open for winter travel? It was voted yes. And then I was asked to get what I would think. Of course, I was 13 years old. I said, I think they should be because of the school bus and the people living on the back road, like me. The next question was, can the town borrow money? It was voted yes. Shall all taxes be paid to the town treasurer? Was the next question. That was voted yes also. And I said, I think that the town treasurer should handle all the money. The vote was yes to whether or not we should pay the public health nurse $276. And I said, I certainly think we should pay for all the work she has done around South Hero. We are going to be on daylight saving time if Burlington does. And that was a very sensible answer. The last question, shall the town sell malt and vinous beverages? The vote was yes on beer and no on liquor. I think I would have voted no for both of them. So that was the town meeting of 1949. Oh, wall, aren't we beautiful? That was
At the T.
at the T at the St. Rose.
Teresa Tebow, myself, Susan, and this was Gloria Douye. She was raised here in South Hero and moved away, and she's back again. And there's one more going up there, and Susan's gonna love this one.
Oh my God, I look like I swallowed an apple or something. That was our chorus, singing in chorus. That was our.
And there's one more that is really neat. And we did have a fashion show. They need to hear that. I want to tell you about. This is it. I know. We had a fashion show in Grand Isle. I was president of the Altar Society, and Abernathy sponsored us, and it was one of the most exclusive stores in Burlington. And we had it at the Grand Isle School, and it was a huge success. We had entertainment. We had fashions. They brought the clothes out. The girls went in. And we'll put this up, and this is a picture of Gloria and I at Abernathy's, and we're looking through magazines and styles. And then we had a luncheon after, plus all kinds of entertainment in between the fashions. And it was a real success. It was for the St. Rose Alignment Church. And it was quite an affair. And Gloria is still a beautiful girl today. But that's she and I in Abernathy's.
And so are you, Joyce.
Oh, it's so good, Susan. Thank you.
Well, we thought we would end this up since we live in such a beautiful place and a beautiful country. We thought we would all stand up and sing God Bless America. Shake yourself out a little bit. That's right. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless my home, sweet home.
Thank you, Joyce and Sue. I know that I have the worst job in this club because every time we have guests who have much, much more to say. And thus, I know some of you want to see the Olympics. We do have things up here that you can come and look at. And Mrs. Brownell brought us refreshments. So please go back and partake. Thank you for coming.